So, Nicky, is it fair to say that Christian Pulisic is, if not AC Milan's best player, among their best players? And do you think if he keeps this pace up, that by the end of the season, we could be having kind of team of the season talks for Christian Pulisic in his first year of Serie A?
I feel like you're setting traps for me here. There's a fine line between a few different questions that you just asked. One is, has he been their best player this season? Which is a different question to, is he their best player? Because if you're going to ask if he's their best player, then I'm going to say, well, there's a World Cup winner in that team. There's Rafael Leao in that team. There's Theo Hernandez in that team, played in the last World Cup final. I think there's a few players in that team who maybe have a better claim to being the best player in that team overall. Has he been the best player this season? That's a slightly more interesting conversation. I think Giroud still might be ahead of him in that particular debate, given that Giroud has more goals. And of course, when you think about one of the most impactful moments that Pulisic has had in this season, which was scoring that equaliser against Newcastle in the Champions League, which became this turning point for them and saved their European campaign, really. Yes, it was Pulisic who put the ball in the net, but who was it who made that really clever pass inside the area, who didn't take the shot on himself to create the opportunity? Well, it was still Olivier Giroud. So I'm pushing back a little bit, but at the same time, I think it's not crazy to put him in that conversation of who has been Milan's most important player this season. As you just had up on the screen with the stats, combined 12 goals and assists. I don't think he's had numbers like that in 4 years. I don't think, maybe since his first season at Chelsea. He's been scoring exceptional goals. When you think about the one against Frosinone, when Mike Maignan went over the top to him and he beat 3 defenders before doing that little no-look chip over. But more than the goals, he's just been involved in almost everything for Milan. I think it's interesting when you get into the numbers, the stats at Milan. He doesn't show up at the very top spot in any category, goals, dribbles, passes, anything like that, but he's very near the top in most of them. And I think that reflects what a immediately central player he's become. Before that game against Newcastle, you saw all of the newspapers in Italy were making this discussion about Milan have to look to their senators, they have to look to their leaders, and they were naming Giroud and Pulisic because he's a guy who's played a lot of games in Europe and who's got these experiences, and he turned up. So I think he is a really, really important player at Milan already. I think when you talk about all of Serie A, he's in the conversation of one of the very best signings anywhere in the league this summer. I think the other name that you jump up with him right away is Marcus Thuram at Inter, but there aren't many others. And I think there's so much in it. You can look at the numbers, you can listen to the head coach, Stefano Pioli, when he talks about how he had this seminar recently with journalists at Milan's training ground. He talked about how the shape of the team, even though it looks like something consistent, that sort of 4-2-3-1, it isn't balanced. He sets the team up in a way to deliberately encourage opponents to play the ball out to Pulisic's side and not Leao's side, because he knows Pulisic will give him more defensively as well. So he's a really important player, and he's really stepped up and become something important to Milan almost immediately since joining there this summer.
Okay, Nicky, you see what Sebi did there? He changes my words. I let him go on his little rant when he said I called him the best player. I've been saying he's arguably the best player, but I'm going to go out right now and say I don't think it's arguable anymore. You look at that transfer fee. You're talking about one of the best transfer signings in Serie A. What's it, 20 million euros? That is a steal for what Christian Pulisic is today. There is no other player in Serie A with his numbers in the month of December. If we go to this team right now, his importance, his goals, his assists, the timely manner in which he scores them or in which he is there at that moment, they've given this Milan team some big moments, some points. And if we want to go further, he makes those around him better. I honestly think his numbers would be better if the players around him, Nicky, would be better. I can't tell you how many times I am pulling out my hair when Rafael Leao is wasting opportunities that Christian Pulisic puts on a platter for him. It could be better for him. He's been as good as advertised. He's brilliant anywhere you put him on the pitch, which leads me to this question. Is there a possibility that we see Christian Pulisic in the middle as a number 10 pulling the strings for Milan?
There's a possibility. Actually, we saw a little bit of that in the Coppa Italia game that we just had the highlights of up on the screen. And it's something that Stefano Pioli talked about after the game. Yes, one of the other big signings this summer was Samuel Chukwueze, and the idea that you could have Leao on one wing, Chukwueze on the other wing, and maybe Pulisic through the middle. is one that I think people have been a little bit tantalized by ever since Pulisic showed up. Having said that, as Pioli also pointed out, he said this idea of Pulisic as a trequartista, as a number 10, I like it. But he also pointed out, but Chukwueze is off to the African Cup of Nations now, so we're not going to do that for a little bit. So maybe eventually. I think it certainly is in Pioli's thinking, but right now I think we're probably going to keep seeing him on that opposite flank to Leao, partly for the reason that I just mentioned. Pioli is deliberately trying to encourage teams to play the ball out to Pulisic's side because he doesn't trust that opposite flank where you've got Leao. It's not just Leao, actually. It's the fact you've got Leao and then Theo Hernandez behind him, who's a brilliant player, but not always the most defensively minded defender. So having Pulisic on the opposite side is actually really important to the way the team is balanced right now.
Christian Pulisic in the middle of the park. Yes, please. If we have to wait till after the Africa Cup of Nations, I'm okay with that. But I've been screaming from the rooftops about a lot of things, but definitely about that for a while. Love Christian Pulisic through the middle of the park.